Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Rules Committee will come to order, and I want to thank each of you for being here today. In particular, we are here as a committee to consider the fiscal year 2014 omnibus, which contains all 12 appropriations subcommittee bills and provides the necessary funding to operate all government agencies through the end of 2014 fiscal year. After this body and the Senate agreed to the budget framework in December, our young chairman, Hal Rogers from Kentucky, and his Senate Appropriations Committee counterpart were tasked with producing a proposal to fund the federal government for the remainder of fiscal year by the January 15th deadline. I want to thank Hal for his tireless work on behalf of not just Mrs. Lowy, but for really all House members and Senate Appropriations and their staffs who spent a good bit of time to make this happen, to get us where we are today, especially over the holidays. I know they did extra work. This bill funds the federal government's programs to meet the needs of all Americans while working on the necessary fiscal constraints that we are currently facing. The bill represents a $21 billion decrease in overall spending when compared to last year. And it's the first time since the Korean War that government spending will be cut 4 years in a row. This bill also protects other important priorities, including through congressional oversight, reduced regulatory burdens, and strong national security. Some important highlights include a military pension fix, which amends the Ryan-Murray Amendment to exempt medically retired personnel and survivor benefit recipients from having their cost of living benefits temporarily reduced. This will ensure disabled veterans and surviving families receive the full benefits that they are due. In addition, this bill provides no new funding for what might be known as Obamacare and holds the line on funding for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the prime agency responsible for the implementation of the Affordable Care Act known as Obamacare. Furthermore, as highlighted by many outside organizations, this bill rolls back Obamacare funding in other areas, including reducing the Prevention and Public Health Fund by $1 billion to prevent the Secretary of Health and Human Services from rating these funds, what has become known as a slush fund, for Obamacare exchanges, and reducing IPAB by $10 million. Finding ways of fulfilling our responsibilities with fewer resources is always difficult and painful, but I believe today, from what I have seen and look forward to hearing today, that this is a balanced approach. Millions of hardworking American families have faced the same task over the recent years of trying to make sure that their budgets were balanced and to make tough decisions. That's what Congress is doing now. It's tough, but essential work. I think this bill strikes the appropriate balance. It meets the guidelines of the Ryan-Murray deal, it makes strategic reforms, and avoids any further government shutdowns. Perhaps more importantly, I believe it gains back ground that we had ceded, not just the House and the Senate, but the American people had ceded to the President of the United States. The limits of a CR became very apparent over time. The advantage of going through regular order, having the House and the Senate complete their work appropriately and together, is the right thing to do. I would note that we've been joined by our House chaplain, so it seems as though we're a lot like any other team that needs help, divine intervention, that we are in need and the Father is here. Mr. Rogers, Ms. Lowy, thank you for joining us today. Your comments are not only going to be well received today, but we expect each of you to be able to highlight those areas because you have firsthand knowledge of what's in this bill. Much has been said about the bill lately, but the most important thing is that all members of Congress, through a searchable website that's available through the Rules Committee website, inside and outside interest who have been able to highlight the bill have provided the American people with a good bit of data and information. I do confess I wish that we had days in which to do this, but I would note that on a bipartisan bicameral basis for over almost some 30 days. You've been hard at work at this. And so your professional testimony before this committee will go a long way. Without exception, whatever you have in writing will be entered into the record. And I would welcome both of you gentlemen from Kentucky as recognized.
Mr. Chairman,
green light's on.
thank you for allowing us to be here, and thank the members of the committee for the diligent hard work that this committee does day in and day out. It's the hardest, I think it's the hardest job on the Hill, is serving on the Rules Committee, because you have to meet so often and so long and so late many times. Mr. Chairman, this has been a hard chore that Ms. Lowy and I and the others have had during the last month to put together a bill that normally would take all year and be done in 12 separate pieces. But because of the time constraints, when the Budget Committee finally gave both the House and Senate the same number to which we would mark to, when that time occurred, December the 3rd, I think it was, we've had less than 30 days to put together a $1 trillion bill plus. But I have to tell you, although it was hard work, I sincerely enjoyed our time together, Ms. Lowy and Barbara Mikulski and Dick Shelby and us at Christmas time and New Year's time as well. So we made the best of tough work. So, Mr. Chairman, this is the conclusion of our work on the 12 appropriations bills for fiscal 14, which will fund the government through September 30 of 14. We've been working on the completion of this bill for months. We said over and over that what we needed was that common overall discretionary budget cap number for both the House and Senate. We could not do our work while we had two different numbers, the House and the Senate numbers. That just simply made it impossible for us to do our work. Last December, finally, thanks to the Ryan Murray agreement, we got that number. Given a month, we said, give us a month, give us a number in a month, and we'll produce a bill. And that's where we are right now. For staff and members of both the House and the Senate Appropriations Committee, to work day and night to get this done, often at great sacrifice to their families. And I want to especially thank the staff who immersed themselves in this huge, complicated project and worked day and night to get it done. Will Smith, the chief clerk of our committee, and his staff has been absolutely marvelous, and David as well, for all the work that they have put into this bill. But we've done it. We've said a month. We've kept our word. We got a bill for you to consider. And I want to thank my counterpart, Mrs. Lowy, for all of her hard work as well, and her ability to understand what it was we needed, and we tried to understand what she needed on her side. We didn't always agree on everything. We did agree that a top-line number and getting this work done was our number one priority. She's been fair, she's been reasonable, she's been dedicated throughout the process. We would not be here today without her efforts, and I thank you. So we're here to seek an appropriate rule on this package to allow for timely consideration and passage so we can fund the government for the rest of fiscal 14 and avoid another government shutdown. As you know, we're seeking to move this package as a House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 3547. I only wish we could consider each and every bill in this package separately, but unfortunately the time gave us one shot and one shot only to get it done. I want us to get back in regular order now for fiscal 15, and that's our goal and our plan, both the House and Senate, on both sides of the aisle. We're determined that the Appropriations Committee will get back to its normal way of doing business, and that's passing out 12 separate bills during the year to be considered in the subcommittee and the full committee and the House floor, conference with the Senate, as it has been done in times past. So for the reason that we only had one shot, we were compelled to consider these bills as a consolidated appropriations package made up of all 12 of the appropriations bills for fiscal 14. There is hope for a more regular process this coming year, next year, 15. Because of the Ryan-Murray agreement, we now have a common number for fiscal year 2015, both for the Senate and the House, and we will redouble our efforts to get back to what we all want, that's regular order this coming year. And I think that's one of the biggest and best results of this bill that's before us now. It clears the path for a more sane way of funding the government. This consolidated package fully abides by the terms of the Ryan-Murray agreement, providing a total of $1.012 trillion in discretionary funding, with $520.5 billion for defense, $491.7 billion for non-defense programs. It touches every aspect of the federal government, from critical national security efforts to important transportation infrastructure to the education of our children. It also includes, as the chairman noted, a fix for military retiree pensions to ensure that medically retired personnel and survivor benefit plan annuitants receive their full yearly cost of living increase. The consolidated package is the bipartisan product of a month of hard, long, careful negotiations with our counterparts in the Senate. Senator Mikulski and I both came to the table with a commitment to getting things done, and I believe we've succeeded in drafting a solid piece of legislation that keeps our nation on the right track. It continues the downward trend of federal spending and maintains our priorities and values. And I want to say a word of thanks to Senator Mikulski, who was a great partner in this project. She's a product of the House before she went to the Senate, and she understands a lot about what goes on over here. She was an able participant in these negotiations, understands how to get things done. So I believe this package, Mr. Chairman, is worthy of the support of each and every member of the House. As you know, after the short-term CR is enacted, I hope later today, we have until January 18th to approve this omnibus. 3.5 months into the fiscal year, it's high time we put our 2014 work to bed. The House must pass this omnibus as soon as possible so that the Senate can pass it and send it to the President for his signature. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. We're delighted that you have taken time to give us a high-level overview of this, and with great anticipation as this committee was aware that both you and Mrs. Lowy would be here. We would recognize her at this time and welcome her to the Rules Committee. All my colleagues and I are delighted that both of you are here together. Gentlewoman's recognized.
I want to thank Chairman Sessions for welcoming us here and for your graciousness. We are delighted to present this bill before this committee on both sides of the aisle. And I just want to say what a pleasure it has been for me to work with our chairman, Chairman Rogers. He has been so cooperative, and he has been very vocal in the last few months about how important it is for us to restore regular order to the process. And this process did restore regular order, and it's why I'm so pleased with the final product. Chairman Rogers worked closely with Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby. He was so respectful to me in looking for my input, and I hope this is the beginning of regular order in this House, because I think this is a product that we can be proud of. There are some on one side of the aisle that may be not so thrilled with certain parts, and I would say that for the same on this side of the aisle. But what makes this product so very good is that it is a bipartisan product, and it does restore regular order to the House. So I thank you again for your leadership. Just to review how we got here and where we are, in my judgment, since 2010, Congress's rush towards austerity has been putting the U.S. further and further, frankly, in a hole. We've cut back on critical investments in education, public health, safety, transportation, medical research, science, energy efficiency, and the whole range of activities that promote economic growth, job creation, and global competitiveness. And, as you know, we cut the discretionary side of the budget, which only represents about a third of total government spending by a disproportionate share. And this has had a devastating economic impact with cuts to job training, Head Start slots, teachers, seniors, low-income nutritional assistance, life-saving medical research, infrastructure upgrades, and many other priorities. The December budget agreement and this 2014 omnibus bill are a breakthrough. We have finally stopped digging, and we're on the path to regular order. Importantly, this package is made up of actual appropriation bills with specific agency direction instead of relying on the autopilot of a continuing resolution. On the non-defense side of the budget, this omnibus package will begin to restore funding cut by the sequester. On the defense side, the meat acts of sequestration cuts will not be repeated in this fiscal year. This package makes some key investments. It provides increases from last year's level in nutrition programs, food safety, COPS funding, the National Weather Service, the NIH, CDC, the Legal Services Corporation, federal defenders, housing, transportation, and I'm very pleased that it has a new early education program at Head Start. Additionally, our veterans programs are fully funded, and our efforts to reduce the backlog of veterans' claims will continue. The violence against women programs are funded and above the President's request, and finally, federal furloughs should not occur in this new fiscal year, and agencies will finally have some certainty about funding levels. I wish we could have completed this process last October when the fiscal year actually started, but better late than never. I hope that we can preserve the bipartisan spirit with which this omnibus agreement has been reached in the budget and appropriation cycles to come, understanding that the President's budget will likely arrive late given this time in which we have completed our work for fiscal year 2014. And again, I want to close by saying what a delight has been for me to work so cooperatively with Chairman Rogers, Chairwoman Mikulski, Senator Shelby, and I look forward to continuing this process, and thank you again for asking us here today.
Ms. Lowy, thank you very much. You and the chairman have done yeoman's work, and I know you're making yourself available to us for specific questions that we have. I'd like to defer, if I can, at this time, rather than me taking time, I'd like to defer to one of our colleagues who represents you on this committee, Mr. Cole, who is going to cover what I consider to be essential items that are in the bill, and it's really less for us to say and more for you, if we get any of this wrong, to please make sure that what we're saying is correct. I found myself in the unusual position of trying to make sure that what's in the bill we're actually talking about from a factual basis to make sure we more fully understand the bill as opposed to something that may be later in another section that changes it. So I'd like to defer, if I can, to the young chairman from Oklahoma, the gentleman, Mr. Cole. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to begin by telling my chairman, my ranking member, how exceptionally proud I am of both of them. I think the service that they've provided to our committee and to this Congress is really unparalleled. We've been lurching along from CR to CR, crisis to crisis, with this committee not able to do its work. And the fact that you've not only restored it, but done it in a bipartisan manner is, I think, a signal contribution and example to all the rest of us. I really, and I mean that you're both my very dear and good friends, but I can't tell you how proud I am of you both as members of Congress and how you work together.
Will the gentleman yield?
I certainly yield the chairman.
Well, I can address the gentleman as not only a member of this committee, but he's a cardinal. He's a chairman of a subcommittee on our committee now, brand new. He's been of immeasurable help to us in this process, and we're looking forward to even greater things out of him this coming year. Thank you.
Well, that's very generous, Chairman. Thank you.
Can't let that moment go by. Because one of the real pleasures of my serving in the Congress is developing a close relationship. And Mr. Cole is so wise and thoughtful. And we had an opportunity to visit Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, not the Middle East, Abu Dhabi and other places. And on those trips, you really get to understand the issues, but also develop friendships. So to have a person of Mr. Cole's character in the Congress has made such a difference, not only to this committee, but to the whole Appropriations Committee on a whole range of issues on which we work. My friend, it's good to see you.
You're good to see you, my friend. You both are much too generous. But let me start by making a couple of points that, frankly, both of you made, but I think are really worth driving home. And I know members of this committee are aware of this, but I think I hope all our colleagues are. For those who are spending hawks, that are worried about spending, and that's an appropriate thing to be worried about, this is quite an achievement. Chairman Rogers discussed some of the fact that we've now cut discretionary spending 4 years in a row. But you actually can go back, as I recall, I mean, this bill is $1.012 billion. The last fiscal year of the Bush administration, FY 08, it was $1.176 billion. It's $164 billion below what we were spending 6 years ago. And then you add in inflation and what that's done. I mean, it's an extraordinary achievement. And when I look at the budget, I look at it in three tranches. I look at discretionary, I look at entitlement, and then I look at tax expenditures. And I would say the discretionary part of the budget has probably more than done its part in terms of contributing to deficit relief. We did deal with tax expenditures somewhat in the fiscal cliff, which I voted for, and you can look at it as it provided more revenue, or you could look at it as it made most of the Bush tax cuts in law permanently when they were running out. But it contributed to deficit reduction. Entitlements is the next big problem and challenge, and I would hope our colleagues on both sides of the aisles on Ways and Means do as well as you both have done in dealing with this problem. But to my colleagues again on this committee, this wasn't just willy-nilly across the board spending cut. What I like about it best is it was really thoughtfully done under both the chairman and the ranking member. We did our work the year leading up to it. I mean, you got this done in a month, but the point is all our committee hearing, even we were under the CR, you guys were continuing to work. And so when our staff and our leadership of our committee sat down, a lot of the hard work had been done over many, many months. And we never let the committee quit operating, if you will, even when we were in a CR situation. The fact that we have this flexibility now, to my friends that I know have some concerns, and this is a large bill, 1,500 pages, but as many of you know, I follow Indian issues pretty good. This is more money in Indian health than we had last year, even though the overall spending is lower. This is more money for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, I think, than the President requested. As my friend Ms. Lowy mentioned, this is more money for violence against women than the President requested. This is more money for veterans claims, where I know we have a bipartisan concern about trying to clear up the backlog there. So there are a lot of fine-tuning that was done in this committee in this month-long process to do what Congress is supposed to do, address certain areas, maybe take a little bit less, out of some and put more in the others. But the point is, it was thoughtfully done and done across the way. I want to agree with both my friends that I think getting us out of this, again, crisis to crisis CR syndrome is probably the biggest part of this bill, bigger than the savings, bigger than I think many of the really smart and wise decisions that were done at the individual committee level. But the chance, and I want to give Congressman Ryan and Senator Murray, Chairman Murray, a lot of credit for this too. I mean, they gave us finally that top line number that we needed so you could do your work here and that we'll need next year so we can, get things moving in the right direction. But this shows if we get that number, the Appropriations Committee can produce in a bipartisan way and do it in a way that is thoughtful. If we can follow my friend, the chairman's recommendation and do the 12 bills this next year, we'll be able to bring these bills on the floor under an open rule, which I know both of us like to do, and give every member of Congress an opportunity to bring in addition what they would like to do. So that's exceptionally important that we pass this legislation for that reason. This was a bill, I think, that really demonstrates when we work in a bipartisan and a bicameral way that guess what? We're probably going to have a bipartisan and a bicameral vote. So that idea that we actually worked together inside the committee and produced a bipartisan product means once we go to the floor, yeah, we're going to have opponents on both sides of the aisle, but my guess is there'll be a majority of the majority and a majority of the majority of both parties here that actually produce a product because you're bringing us something that's been thoughtfully put together, worked on, and has been the product of give and take and bargaining in good faith. Let me just end with this point because I really don't have any questions. My colleagues will have some, but I've had the privilege of participating at least in parts of this measure. But I do want to end with a personal story. If you don't think they were working hard, when they were getting close to the finish, Ms. Loy, you were wearing our chairman out. So a couple of us thought we should all go over and have dinner at the Capitol Hill Club and give him a chance to have a decent meal because he'd been working hard. I think this was last Thursday night or Wednesday night or something like that. Thought maybe he ought to have a cocktail or something just to ease the strain. And we sat down and we started, and his cell phone rang, and you were on the other end of the cell phone. And I think you had Senator Mikulski with you. And he got up. We don't know what's going on. We knew it must be important because he got up and went over to the other table. We did go ahead without him because it was about 30 or 40 minutes. But I know how closely both of you collaborated throughout this and really worked in good faith. And I just want to, again, thank you for your leadership, what you've done, I think, for the Congress, what you've produced, and the fact that it's bipartisan. And hopefully this is the beginning of a process that will work through this year for fiscal year 2015. I believe it is, but I think it's very important that we get off to a bipartisan start and have a good bipartisan vote for this legislation that you two have worked so well together on.
Gentlemen, yield.
And certainly yield.
I thank the chairman for his words and friendship. This has been a thoughtful and well thought out process we went through, but it just didn't start at the beginning of this 30-day period of time, as you have alluded to. On the House side, we passed 4 of these 12 bills on the floor, and we passed all but one of the balance through committee. So we came to this 30-day process after we had already sort of cooked the numbers on all of these bills. And the Senate had, to their credit, had taken, I think, all 12 of their bills through committee. None on the floor, but through the committee. So they had thought through as well each of the 12 bills. So we came to the conference with the Senate with our subcommittee chairman on our side and ranking members, working with their counterparts in the Senate on their individual bill out of the 12. And they worked out the differences between them, most of them, at the subcommittee level. What they couldn't agree upon was bounced up to the four of us, chairman, ranking on the House and Senate side. And that's been the process of these last 30 days, essentially. So it has been a well thought out process. We've had the input of all of the committee on both sides of the body of the Capitol. And that gave us a really good working platform to work from, because we had done that year-long work. So with this common number now that the Ryan Murray budget has given us for fiscal 15, they've given us a number, both House and Senate, which will allow us to hopefully carry out that process of subcommittee consideration all the way through to conference with the Senate.
Well, as an example of what that does, just a point of information, just before this meeting I met with Chairman Calvert, who's new chairman, met our entire subcommittee on Interior. And as my two friends know, that tends to be one of the more contentious subcommittees. We have a great area where we work together, which is Indian issues, Native American issues, but there's lots of points of controversy on EPA and what have you. And that committee was very thrilled, with the product, and we'll get overwhelming support out of the members on both sides of the aisle because they thought the issues that they couldn't solve themselves, and there's not very many issues that members as skillful as Mr. Calvert and Mr. Moran can't solve. They're very able, but they thought they got really good decisions when they kicked it upstairs as well. So that commends both of you and your two counterparts in the Senate. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. I took a lot of time. Thank you. But again, I'm just so proud of my two chairmen, proud of my committee, and proud of the institution that we're, I think, going to have a big bipartisan victory and move in the right direction this week. Yield back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your summary of the bill and those things that were included. I would now defer to the gentlewoman from New York, the ranking member, for her time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to both of you. As the only New Yorker by way of Kentucky in the room, I can tell you how proud I am of both of you. You've done extraordinarily well under very hard circumstances. I'm very much aware of that.
I think you're a Kentuckian by way of New York.
Sort of, okay.
Rather than vice versa.
Well, once a Kentuckian, always a Kentuckian. I know that for a fact. And I've known Hal for a very long time before I came here, and always appreciated him. And Nita, we're very proud of you as your first year's ranking member. You have really risen to the occasion, and we're very, very happy about that. The shortage of time and the difficulty that you had, I think you've really come through, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent to give the statement of the administration's policy.
Without objection.
The administration supports the House passage of H.R. 3547, making appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and other purposes. The legislation adheres to the funding levels agreed to in the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013, reflects compromise by both parties. It unwinds some of the damaging cuts caused by sequestration, ensures the continuation of critical services that the American people depend on, and invests in essential areas such as education, infrastructure, not enough there. Maybe we can do better next year. Manufacturing and scientific research, which I think, too, needs more help, which contribute to the growing economy, creating jobs and strengthening the middle class. Further, H.R. 3547 is a positive step forward that helps return the budget process to regular order. The administration urges swift passage of the legislation. Hal, I don't get to read many of those up here. So we're happy to do that. Look, I do want to say that the NIH, the help there is much appreciated, but we're still short. And since research and innovation have really been the bread and butter of the United States, I hope we can do better in the budget yet to come. One of the saddest things for me was during that 16-day shutdown, that of the 5 Nobel laureates that worked for the United States government, 4 were declared non-essential. That says a lot about, I think, our lack of really setting good priorities. So we need to do that. And infrastructure, which is crumbling, and we need to pay a lot more attention, I think, to that as well. So I hope that as we begin the process for the next budget, that we can really begin to spend some money on ourselves and our future. But in the meantime, I think with what you have had to work with, you've done an extraordinary job. And it's like everybody else, as you've made very clear, some will love it, some won't. There are parts of it that I'm concerned about, but some I'm very happy about. So thank you very much for your good work, and I have no questions.
Ms. Slaughter, thank you very much, not only for your statement, but also your continuing help to make sure that as we welcome our guests, that they know that they are welcome up here, and the information they provide to this committee is essential on an ongoing basis. And I do believe that the things as you speak about long-term, whether it be NIH or infrastructure spending, I have long taken, whether I was at the 9th spot or perhaps the 1st spot on this committee, I've long taken my time to make sure that I spoke about things that I saw that were important for this country and for the Congress to focus on. And know that every one of the members of this committee not only have that opportunity, but I believe the authority and responsibility to do that, and I respect what you said. Thank you very much. Gentlewoman from North Carolina, Vice Chairman of the Committee, Mrs. Fox, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and far be it from me to end this love fest that's going on here, but I will add my thanks to the chairman and ranking member and their staff for the hard work that's been done. And as others have said, and others will say after me, this is not the bill any of us individually would have written, but I think the important thing is that we do get back to regular order and that we're able to work on changing policies and that we're able to, I believe, bring back to the Congress its prerogative of developing budgets. Continuing resolutions are not the way for us to be operating because that puts the administration primarily in control of how the spending is going. And I get many, many letters from people saying, you know, you have the power of the purse, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? We, in the House, do start the revenue bills. People don't read the Constitution real carefully when they say that, but we have to work with the Senate. And I think that we're doing, in part, what the American people want us to do, which is work in a bipartisan fashion. Again, we never get everything that we want. People out there in the real world don't get it either for themselves, but sometimes they expect us to do that. So I appreciate what you've done, and I have no questions. And I appreciate, again, the very strong commitment that you've made to make the process work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back her time. Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Coach, I too want to thank both the chairman and the ranking member for their tireless work on this, and you know, and again, I will say what the gentlelady from North Carolina said. It's not necessarily the bill any of us would have written individually, but clearly the bill I would have written would have had would have increased the spending level in certain areas, including medical research, which is still, in my view, vastly underfunded. Having said that, this bill begins to chip away at sequestration. And look, the reason why we're in this position is because the numbers of sequestration were, were unacceptable to everybody. You couldn't get a transportation bill passed here. You couldn't bring an HHS bill to the floor because the numbers were so low. I mean, they were just unrealistic in every way you looked at them. And we begin to chip away at that in this, but we haven't chipped quite enough away, in my opinion, where we can truly celebrate. I can say that I intend to support this bill because it will mean fewer kids will be thrown off a Head Start. It'll mean that fewer medical research programs will be cut, notwithstanding the fact that we're still not at the level we need to be at in terms of NIH funding, which I think impacts negatively our ability to compete around the world. We're losing researchers to other countries. I think that is a mistake. We want the smartest people in the world to be here in the United States doing their research so we can develop the new breakthroughs in medicine and find cures to diseases. I'm grateful that we're not going to have another shutdown, that there won't be any more furloughs, that there'll be some certainty this year, which I think is welcomed by everybody outside the Beltway. But I will just kind of temper my enthusiasm by saying that you know, we have some big problems in our country that we're not addressing. And while this compromise is better than where we were, is better than the sequestration levels, I still think we have a long way to go. So I intend to support this to kind of move the process forward. But I'd be lying to you if I told you I want to get up and down and do jumping jacks, because in many ways this still is inadequate for the needs that our country faces. Having said that, I hope we can, as we move forward this year, embrace reality a little bit better and get away from these ideological battles where we're coming up with numbers that even the majority in this House, after supporting these budget numbers, couldn't pass appropriations bills. I'll just say one final thing. You know, we were talking about, you know, entitlements and revenues and discretionary spending, and when you use those terms all the time, it tends to sound like we're having an abstract debate. But behind a lot of what you have tried to fix in this bill are real people. You know, I mean, whether it's Head Start, whether it's medical research, you know, whether it's helping senior citizens or veterans, these are real people. And we need to make sure that our priority remains on helping the people in need in this country. And so I applaud you for working in a bipartisan way, and look forward to seeing this bill on the floor, and hope we could do better next time around. Yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time, and I appreciate once again for the comments that the gentleman is making about the good work that I believe both the House and the Senate provided. And I'm quite honestly, we didn't prepare our comments together, but I think that cutting a deal and following regular order is seen by this committee to both of you in a very positive way, and I admire the committee's response to that. Would now yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll add my thanks to the work that you all did. I have to ask. I'm not quite as positive as my young chairman to my right. Rather than viewing this as a great success, I guess I kind of view it as the end of a terrible failure. Right? I look at all the abilities that you all have on your committees. I look at all the opportunities that you all have, as you said, Ms. Lowy, and I thought you said it so well. You said this includes specific agency directives rather than putting it all on autopilot, relying on the autopilot. I mean, that's what we do here. We're legislators, and some of our very best sit on your committee, and yet for the 3 years that I've been serving here, those skills have gone for naught. And that's certainly not a knock on the work you do. I happen to have a sheet my staff prepared for me. They said, you know, for 2014, this year, that we've been trying to finish up 4 House-passed bills with 215 House amendments, trying to work through that open process. 0 Senate amendments and 0 Senate-passed bills. Roll it back a year to 2013. You all 7 House-passed bills with 277 House amendments considered on the floor. Over to the Senate side, 0 Senate amendments and 0 bills passed. I'm not excited about a lot that's here. I'm very excited about some that's here. I'm opposed to 1,500-page bills as a matter of principle, opposed to closed processes as a matter of principle. But I believe that this gives us that opportunity to turn the page on this, but we've all heard that so many times. Golly, if you'll only vote for this today, it's all going to be better tomorrow. I've got to ask you, since you all have been 24/7 involved in this negotiating process with the Senate, do you expect it to be different next year? Do you expect 0 Senate-passed bills, 0 Senate amendments to be different? Do you really see, from your perspective of having more information than many of the rest of us do, that opportunity to complete an appropriations process for the first time in my congressional service?
As much as I enjoyed spending Christmas and New Year's with Nita and Barbara McCluskey, I don't want to do it again. This omnibus bill was the only way out that we had. because the Budget Committee had not given us common numbers until early December. Normally that takes place back in March and April, so that we can do timely work. This left us only this way to do it, a comprehensive big bill. No, my goal in life is to get this committee back on regular order, where we do 12 individual bills. And I think we can do that. It will not be easy. There will be hundreds of amendments, as is the custom. But we can do this, and we need to do it, and we will do it. I think we're both committed to that, are we not, Nita?
Well, I would like to follow up with what the chairman has said. I think we're committed to regular order. And I think it's so important for this institution and for the American people to see that we can work together. Our colleagues come from all different parts of the country, different views on a whole range of issues. But that's what democracy is all about. And for us not to have had this process for the last few years, I think has had a terrible detrimental effect on the reputation of this Congress. So as we look through at these bills, I'm thrilled about our investment in Head Start. I would have liked to put more resources in the NIH. We could have all different opinions. That's what the legislative process is about. That's what democracy is all about. So I would hope that everyone in the Congress searches their soul as we move forward. They can go home, they can talk to their constituents, they can emphasize as many issues as they personally believe are the right way to go, but at some point, we have to get together and really work in a bipartisan way, even among Democrats, and I would say, the chairman would say among Republicans. It's not as if all Democrats agree or all Republicans agree, but we have to really show our constituents that we can work together, or this institution will continue to lose favorability among the people of the United States of America. So I am optimistic.
Well, as much as you all have both, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Let me interrupt a second. I think the last time that the Congress passed 12 individual bills in the regular order was like 05 or 06, somewhere in there. So this has been going on too long. And as you say, the talent that exists on this committee and the wisdom that I think it possesses as well has been put to the field, out in the field for all these years. I'm determined to get our members back involved in deciding how taxpayers' monies are spent.
Well, as much as you have been lauded by all of your colleagues for the tremendous effort it took to get this product done, I intend to work my hardest to make sure you never end up doing another product like this again, and I'm grateful to your commitment to that same goal. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Georgia yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida, Judge Hastings, is recognized.
Thank you
Yes, sir.
very much, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, thank both of you, and I echo the sentiments of my colleagues. I haven't heard anything that I disagree with that came from either side. I do have one question of you, and then I'll make a statement of my own observations with reference to this measure. And that question is, since both of you were in the active negotiations, and at the same time that your negotiating was going on, a lot of discussion in the country was taking place with reference to unemployment insurance. Can you give us some idea of what, if any, discussion was taking place within the negotiators, what you all thought about it? And I understand that it's not contemplated in this omnibus, and likely may, certainly should, in my judgment, be considered separately. But what were you all talking about? What was there any discussion that you can share with us?
Well, it was discussed with no conclusion with the understanding that that's going to be taken up separately on other pieces of legislation, perhaps, by both bodies.
Ms. Lowe?
I would just like to say to my good colleague, I think it's unconscionable that we have not passed an extension of unemployment insurance. In fact, just this week, what is today? It seems like an eternity. Monday morning, I met with some unemployed workers. One was an electrician in his 50s, and he said for the last 10 years, he has not worked a complete year. Wife, who just had a stroke, having trouble to support his family. This is a man in his 50s. Also at this round table was a young man who was much younger, in his 30s, also licensed electrician, goes every day to work, work to try and find a job. So I think it's very unfortunate that we have not passed even a short-term unemployment insurance piece of legislation. I wish we would. There was no way that, because of the differences of opinion, we could attach it to the appropriations bill. But I do hope, my friend, that in the wisdom of members on both sides of the aisle, we'd realize, even though there are differences of opinion on the unemployment insurance legislation, we should pass this short-term fix, and then hopefully we can get a long-term solution because it's so essential. But we realized that pretty much at the beginning that there was no way we could get bipartisan solutions to this. But I want to emphasize again how passionately I feel about passing an extension, even if it's temporary, of unemployment insurance.
Well, I appreciate both your comments. I also understand the restrictions that you were operating under, and I don't quarrel with the product in one sense of the word. I know my feelings regarding those who are unemployed is that we have a responsibility to address that subject, and I concur with you, Ms. Lowe, at least on the short range. All of the discussion indicated that it would cost, for that 3 months, $25 million. I could find $25 million in the budget for defense without any substantial effort and not doing very much damage to the extraordinary work that you all have done. All you have to do is just decommission 3 of those nuclear missiles, and we would have taken care of that, and we still have enough missiles to kill everybody in the world more times than one. So in one sense of the word, I think that's something that we must address here in this Congress. Otherwise, all of us on either side stand accused of leaving a lot of Americans by the wayside in an environment where the economy may be picking up a little bit, but that the jobs are just not there for people. I'm pleased, as is everyone, that there's a plus up in Head Start. I thank you all for your efforts. We have brought here to this committee repeatedly the subject of flood insurance, and even though there's a certain amount of limitation with reference to it, at least it gives us a start to begin to address the actuarial soundness of the flood insurance program. So to that extent, I stand with those that are grateful for that. I think it's a mistake for us, not you, but for us in the Congress, meaning House and Senate, to not address the embassy situations. I've had, and I know Ms. Lowe knows this, as much opportunity as anybody in the United States Congress to travel abroad and to visit many of our embassies and to see the conditions that people are working in. So I hear the arguments about Benghazi, and then I hear the same people step up and say they don't want to provide additional funds for embassy expansion and those things. And I think you all have done a credible job with the resources that you had. Here again, I would have addressed it in a different way. It's the same thing with Guantanamo. One crowd says, and this omnibus says, you can't bring the people at Guantanamo, the few that remain, to United States prisons, which I firmly disagree with. I think we could house those people in United States prisons. We house all sorts of people in United States prisons without any difficulties whatsoever. None of them have ever broken out of the prison that we managed to have there. And then those same voices then criticize the fact that Guantanamo is not closed. You just can't have it both ways, but I guess maybe people can, in some respects, do that. Now, one final thing, and that is I'm pleased that you all were able to find a 1% increase for federal worker pay. I wish it had been 2%. And again, I would have addressed it from the standpoint of taking money away from the defense budget, and specifically in the contractor arena, working with the Pentagon. I could have found you that money right there, in my judgment, without doing any damage to our ability to take care of overseas contingencies, military personnel, operations, and missions. That said, I'm an unabashed supporter of the staff here. And as you look at what you all were able to do, you left the legislative branch at status quo for all intents and purposes. It sounds good politically for us to be able to say, oh, well, we didn't give an increase to the branch of government that has the responsibility of dealing with all of our constituencies. And I can tell you this, I don't know about the rest of you, but in the last 3 years, when we have taken money from our members' representational allowance, during that same period of time, many of us have been unable to give the young people or the older people that work with us an increase in pay. Now, this federal pay 1% does not contemplate what we do in our respective congressional offices. But what I imagine is going to happen with that status quo is a fourth year of most of us not giving most of the people that work with us any additional compensation. Eventually, we will experience a brain drain if we continue down that path. Now, with the legislative branch being at status quo, every other branch having received at least a minimal increase, I believe that the legislative branch should have received a minimal increase as well, and likely some of the members' representational allowance be restored such that we would be able then to afford some assistance for the young people that work with us.
Would my friend yield?
Of course I would.
Quickly, just to 2 points, and I've had more opportunity to look at the bill. We've dumped this on you with very little opportunity. But on embassy security, money was added, and there's actually, I think, over $5 billion on embassy security, and it's about $25 million, not a lot, above the President's request. So our friends really did go back and re-look at that issue. And I couldn't agree with you more about your concerns about the legislative staff. That is the area that I'm a new chairman to. So we were able to kind of pull some rabbits out of the hat. It's modest. It's not what I would say, but there's actually a 1% increase in MRAs in here, so individual members will have more ability. 1% increase for committees as well. You're quite right on your overall number.
Yeah.
But there are within there's lots of different categories, and frankly, some of that decline isn't on our side of this budget. Remember, includes the Senate as well. Right. So the number available in the House, which would not be immediately obvious to you looking at the top line numbers, is actually a little bit more, and will give us a little bit more flexibility than we've had, and that came from some give on the other side of the rotunda. And I'm afraid to ask my two friends down here how they got that. I don't even want to know, but they did it. And in a bipartisan way, they helped us out, and our friends on the other side of the rotunda picked up a little bit more of their fair share of the cost.
Well, I take my good friend's point on both matters, and I'm very glad to know that because I am just operating with the summary of the omnibus provision that was provided with the top line. But all said and done, I appreciate so much Chairman Rogers and Ms. Lowy's efforts, and I know that they, as well as our other colleagues on the Senate side and other members of the House, did the best they could with what they had. But I suggest to you that on down the road, I'm hopeful, as are others, that we will be able to address these matters in a bipartisan way and deal with matters in our country that all of us are mindful of in terms of how to right the ship of state. Thank you all so very much, and Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Would the gentleman engage me just for a second? It's my understanding, I'm really trying to concoct a recollection, and perhaps Chairman Rogers and Mrs. Lowy could help us, but since 2009, members of Congress have not received a COLA treatment.
That is correct.
And it would, I think, be fair to say, nor members who are judges in the federal judiciary, too.
And that is a genuine concern that we should rightly have, Mr. Chairman. We are tied, as you well know, your dad having been a federal judge at the same time that I was, we are tied to the federal judiciary. And we are beginning to experience, I had meetings with 3 judges in the congressional district in the last month. And the younger one of them is considering leaving for the reason that he has not had a pay increase, but he had a family increase. And so it's beginning to take its toll. So I certainly agree with you. I don't argue about the fact that we don't get a raise. My concern is that our staff persons are unable to get what I think they are rightfully due. And I just don't want to have us experience it. There's one other thing attendant to that, Mr. Chairman. And members are always afraid, I'm not, to talk about not receiving pay. There's a $3,000 tax credit that is given to each of us as members of Congress. Now, Hal and Nita were probably here when that came into existence, but it has been, I'm here 21 years, and it's been a $3,000 tax credit all of that time. I don't see that as having a tremendous impact on the federal budget, but it would seem to me that we could have a $10,000 tax credit, and it would allow for some assistance for people here, some of whom members staying in their offices, some staying in dank, dark basements, group homes. I don't think that bodes well for us. And I really appreciate the chairman bringing up the fact of the COLA for federal judges.
I thank gentlemen. As a matter of fact, I've been contacted by the Chief Judge of the Northern District of Texas, Judge Fish, as well as the Chief Judge of the Eastern District of Texas, Chief Judge Davis, about this issue, and I really advise both of them. I wish I could comment more pending. My opinion might be one thing, but really the outcome of this, and I do recognize that. So as the gentleman brought it up, I wanted to make sure.
Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, if you recall, there have been 2 times in the last 50 years that federal judges have had to bring a lawsuit. And that doesn't speak well for us. I wasn't a party to the lawsuit. I became a judge as the lawsuit was in progress. But it took 11 years for judges to get their proper pay. We need to separate it and take our own bullet. If we want to get a pay raise, say it to the people and take our bullet for it rather than connecting us to the federal judiciary. That's just my take on it. I am not one who would argue that we should not receive added pay. People think that, you know, we are here 3 days and you don't work. Hell, I work harder sometimes when I'm home on this job than I do when I'm here. So I don't understand what people are talking about. This is a 7-day-a-week job. Fella came by my house on Sunday asking me something about that, knocked on my door at my house asking me about constituent stuff. So you're never away from this job. And it's as deserving of being properly remunerated as any other job in this country. And I say that as a main supporter of people who are less fortunate than those of us that make $174,000 a year. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir.
The bill does include a COLA for judges.
Okay.
Oh, see, that's
All
where
right, I did not know
that either, and
Yeah.
so I do appreciate. So
Well,
could the
like-
gentleman, did it include federal judges notwithstanding, is it tied to the president or I'm sorry, not the president, that would be a misstatement. It would be tied to federal employees?
It's not in the bill, but it is a matter of the court's. Yeah. So they will be getting a COLA. It's not in this bill, however.
All right.
Oh, the COLA is not in the bill,
Right,
but
they will
evidently
get it.
under an action that someone else has taken.
They will get it.
Well-
could I respond to?
I'm sorry,
Yes,
the
by all
gentleman from
means. By all
Florida
means, Mr.
controls the
Chairman.
time.
Mr. Chairman,
Perhaps
go
he's
right
over
ahead.
back, but-
Mr. Chairman, let me take a moment to respond to Mr. I think
Yes.
Woodall brought this up. And that was about when we've last passed 12 individual bills. My staff has done some quick research, and it explains how important this bill is historically now. Because if we can get this bill passed and let us get on with the 15 individual hearings, it will be very significant. The last time that that we passed 12 bills individually was 2002. The last time we passed all 12 bills before September 30th, the fiscal year, was 96, 97.
Was that 18 or 19, Chairman?
I'm sorry.
1796.
Oh,
1997.
so if we can get this thing back on regular order, which this bill will allow us to do, we can correct a long-standing problem of not using the power of the purse, which constitutionally lives with the Congress. We can get back in that business where members of the Congress are deciding how monies are to be spent rather than kicking the football down to the White House and letting them decide how to spend it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, what you bring to mind is a famous statement, at least it's famous in terms of having been repeated by a lot of people, and that is pretty obviously then we need, most of us not knowing all of the particulars in this bill and the COLA discussion highlighting that, we need to pass the bill in order to know what's in it. But I'm just hoping it's not like this recent food commercial, and I don't want our transcriber to miss this. This food commercial, it keeps getting better, and they say, who's a what's a down the line. I hope it's not like that when we ultimately learn what is really in this bill. But I appreciate you all's work. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida, the gentleman, Mr. Nugent, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I always love following Mr. Hastings because he has some great stories from time to time, particularly that last one. But Mr. Chairman Rogers and Ms. Lowy, I'm impressed that you could come together with our Senate colleagues and actually craft something while it's not anything that probably I would write, and we've heard this before, others would write, but it truly is, I think, a step in the right direction. And I do like the fact when you're talking about regular order, because, Mr. Chairman, you hit it on the head, it is our constitutional responsibility that controls the powers of the purse, and really to make decisions, and Ms. Lowy, you mentioned it about kicking, as you do CRs, we lose our authority and our ability to actually legislate because we hand that off to the executive branch, unfortunately, no matter who's in office in the executive branch, because that's our constitutional responsibility. And I appreciate, in particularly, a couple of things that have occurred within this bill that you crafted. One is on the medically retired. The cut that was to their COLA in the future, I was obviously pretty upset about that, as others were, and I think that, we hear this all the time about our responsibility to those that serve us, that volunteer to go in harm's way for us. And we hear it a lot from members about, how we owe them a debt we can never repay. And I think that you just took a step in the right direction. Because, these young men and women, and I have 3 that currently serve, they look to here as to, do you really mean that, or is that just words? And, we talk about a brain drain. The same thing holds true with our military services in regards to keeping and retaining those that are the brightest and the best to protect us. And secondly is on the flood insurance issue that was in here. Obviously, it's delay. I think everybody realizes and knows that you can't continue to subsidize flood insurance, but the way the unintended consequence of the bill that was passed just took the affordability out of how someone pays for their flood insurance. And lastly, when you see some of the rates that were put across and you go, how can you charge a rate that would basically pay for that house in 4 years if you paid the premium? How is that, how is that correct? And it can't be. So it does give some time for the committee, I think, to do more work in regards to actual sustainability in the flood insurance and making sure that it pays for itself. And there's some other issues with flood insurance, particularly as the fact that, not every year do you expend every nickel that comes into the flood insurance. But there's no way to recoup that and hold it for the next year to build up, because I believe it just goes into our general fund. So there's a number of issues that the committees of jurisdiction have to work on, and I think this gives them time to do that. And lastly, Ms. Lowy, you hit it right on the head when you talked about discretionary funding, and we've certainly, I think, done a fantastic job in regards to trying to rein that back in, but you hit it on the head when it's only 1/3 of the entire spending of this nation. And so for too long, we've no one wants to really talk about entitlements. And I think that's one area that the future has to talk about, and serious tax reform in regards to things that are outside your purview, but certainly will set the tone as to where you appropriate in the future. Yes, sir.
Well, you've put your finger on the problem. When I came to Congress, the Appropriations Committee appropriated 2/3 of all federal spending, and entitlements were 1/3. Now it's just the reverse. 2/3 of spending is now entitlements. Only 1/3 is what we actually decide how we want to spend our money. And it's getting, I say, worse by the day, because we have not reined in the exorbitant growth in mandatory spending, automatic pilot spending. We were elected, all of us were elected in Congress, to decide precisely every year how we're going to spend that year's money.
All right.
And we've given up 2/3 of it and put it in an automatic pilot, taken away any judgment call by any member of Congress on how that money should be spent. And unless we rein in entitlement spending, we won't have any money to spend at all in a few years.
We won't need you.
They won't need us and you or either one.
Right. One thing and I'll close with this. Mr. Woodall asked the question as it relates to the appropriation bills. And, I've heard both of you, and I believe you wholeheartedly will get this done in this upcoming year if everything else works out. But what do you think the chances are of the Senate to actually do it? Because otherwise you're going to be back in the same position over Christmas. And
You mean the 12 bills?
yes.
Well, Senator Mikulski is as committed, she says, as I am, and Ms. Lowy,
Okay.
and others on the committee to getting this done. So, I think all the players are in place to make it happen. Now, it's easy said, it's hard done. But I think we've proved in this bill that we can do the hard things.
Well, maybe this is, I think you laid the groundwork for that, and that's why I know, my good friend Mr. Woodall asked the question why I followed up, is because you had firsthand, you sat across the table, you talked, and you all had to go through the same, I don't want to say grief, but angst as everyone else. So I think it's important maybe that this took place, unfortunate circumstances before this, but where this has taken place to actually have you sit down across the table from each other and with our Senate colleagues to actually say, hey, listen, we can do this. And so good job, and I appreciate it, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman, Georgia, Florida yields back his time. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In reviewing
Thank you, sir.
a big deal like this, there's obviously not enough time to go over a single item. So there's just two that I want to bring up to your attention. One I want to thank you both for. The other one I have to say I'm very disappointed about. So I figured I would balance it with one of each. I'm very thankful for a cut you made, which is a replica of an amendment that I ran on the DHS appropriations bill, which is cutting funding for 287G enforcement by more than $40 million. This is a program that has torn apart families, doesn't do anything to replace our broken immigration system with one that works, and it sends a clear message with this cut in this bill that 287G has no place in our communities, and our budget is a step forward in fixing the broken immigration system. So it's good to see some momentum for addressing some of the flaws and wastefulness in our immigration enforcement programs in this bill. So thank you for including that cut. I was honored to present that on the floor of the House, and I'm very glad that this was included in this bill. Now, however, this only came to my attention some time ago, and I hope that you both have the ability to correct me, because I'd love to be wrong on this, but it's my understanding that PILT payments, payments in lieu of taxes, are zeroed out in this bill. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Well, the PILT program is a mandatory program. As you know, provides compensation to local governments for the loss of tax revenue resulting from the presence of federal land in their county or state. Funding for PILT in fiscal 13 was provided in the MAP 21 Transportation Authorization Bill. And it's been a mandatory program since 2008, out of our hands. Fiscal year 2007 was the last year that PILT was funded within discretionary funds. And in that year, funds were provided at 65% of the authorized level. The committee has been provided assurances from leadership, Speaker, and all of leadership, that PILT payments for fiscal 14 will be addressed expeditiously by the authorizing committees of jurisdiction in the House and Senate. What that means to members concerned about PILT, and I'm one of them, is that the Speaker and leadership is committed to making sure counties receive their county payments in June as expected.
At the same levels as previous years?
It's up to the authorizing committee.
And let me reclaim my time real briefly for my colleagues who don't have federal lands in your district. Federal government owns about half my district. We have the local responsibility for fires, for law enforcement, roads on those lands. We are unable to receive any tax revenue from those federal lands in our counties. So as a very partial, by the way, I might add, a very, very partial reimbursement of the costs of protecting your federal lands that happen to be in our counties, we receive a small amount, payment in lieu of taxes. It does not cover by any means the costs that our counties have to patrol these lands, to protect these lands, to maintain these lands, which we're happy to do. But it is extremely worrisome to me that it has been omitted from the appropriations bill. Our counties have, like Congress itself, in fact, largely a more functional budgeting process, they have a very difficult time making last-minute changes on anything like police or fire protection or capital investment in roads or road maintenance, and the ability to predict over time as an important source of their budget is absolutely critical for these counties to function. Absolutely critical, because remember, they have a lot of the land within their counties they can't tax, they can't develop, they really can't do anything on. I know I've talked to Mr. Bishop before about ways that could potentially be remedied in the future, and that, but we are where we are today, and frankly, we do rely on this for county government to function in many counties. And I want to go to Ms. Lowy to see her response on this. Can I assure my counties, after this, if this bill passes, that they will receive their scheduled PILT payments as they have in the past?
Well, let me just add to what our chairman shared with you. It's my understanding that it's an authorizing issue. It's in the jurisdiction of the Natural Resources Committee, but there is word that it may be included in the Farm Bill. And I would just advise you that with your persuasive arguments, you should deal with the authorizers, because it is not an issue that can be taken up in the appropriations bill. But to the extent that I have any expertise, which I don't, I understand your position, and I encourage you to pursue it with the authorizers. It is an authorizing bill.
Well, just this morning, the Speaker addressed the Republican caucus. This issue came up, and he is strongly committed to taking care of this problem in the appropriate authorizing language.
In the what?
In the authorization bill. We just don't have that authority. This is a mandatory item, not a discretionary item.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up question. I believe, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in prior continuing resolutions it did contain money for PILT. Is that correct? In prior continuing resolutions, money for PILT was included.
As I understand it, Jared, isn't it correct that they have between now and June when the payments are due? So
they do. We're just up again. We're up against two things. One, make sure that they obviously get their money. Two, the budget process of counties and the fact that here we are accustomed to doing things last minute. Counties don't, are run on a shoestring. It's very, very challenging if they don't know exactly what they're going to get and to run their county until who knows when. I don't know when.
If the gentleman would yield.
Yes, happy to.
There's been no appropriations bill, either a CR or otherwise, that has carried PILT funding since '07 when it was made a mandatory item. Now, I'm as concerned about this as anyone else, because my district also has huge problems with not getting PILT funding as well. So I think there's enough commitment. The Speaker's committed to it, leaders committed to it. Chairman Calvert, California, the biggest PILT state, is committed to it. I am. And we're going to make it happen, but it can't be a part of this bill.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll be happy to yield to the gentleman from
Just
Utah.
on this issue. When you were talking a moment ago about mandatory spending, and you equated that with entitlements, that's true. But there are some mandatory spendings that are not entitlements per se. This is one. PILT payment has been made mandatory, not by what the House did, but it was done by Senate action to which the House agreed in 2008. And instead of being funded through the appropriations process, as it had always done, it was then funded through the TARP bill. It was then funded through the MAP bill. And today, I think there are those who would like to fund it, fully fund it again, and I think you can probably rest assured that it will happen, but doing it through the Farm Bill, and that's where the offsets would come. Having said that, I don't see a great deal of value and greatness in having a mandatory program anytime that's not reviewed. I would like to see this program discretionary one more time. It should be in your appropriations process. It should go back to where it was earlier. That is the proper way of reviewing it, the proper way of looking for it, and I would work to see that we do that in the future. But as of now, and the program, it's like slightly characterize it a little bit different. It does not have to go through the resource committee. It is already authorized. It's a matter of where the funding takes place. And the funding is right now you're looking at a funding that would have to come through the Farm Bill. If it is not the Farm Bill, we'll have to find another offset for it. But just for a better review program, the review should actually come through your appropriate committee. I also recognize you had a difficult time in your committee because in the middle or as these negotiations were starting, you changed chairmans of that appropriation subcommittee. So Mr. Calvert didn't have a whole lot of time to get up to speed on it. Yep. Mr. Simpson was no longer there. It was in a transition time, and that was a difficult time for all of these. But I would like you to know that this is one of those programs that should be back in your lap. It should be something that you look at an appropriate time, and if for no other reason, so we can make sure that those in the 49 states that receive Pell funding clearly understand what it is, and our good friends don't. I find one of the great ironies of this, especially since it's not in this particular bill, the only state that does not receive any PILT funding is Rhode Island. The Senate chairman of the Interior Appropriations Committee happens to be from Rhode Island. Not reading anything other than that into it, it's just a matter of fact.
Mr. Chairman, I would just...
I'll be happy to, controlling time, I'll be happy to go to the gentlelady from New York.
Oh, I would just like to say to my good friend and my good friend Mr. Bishop, I hope you work with us to get a higher allocation in appropriations so we'll have enough resources to cover this issue.
So reclaiming my time again, to sum up, thank you for making the 287G cuts. I think you were both on the record saying you want to work to find a way to fund PILT. And just keep in mind again, imagine, and I think the chair doesn't have to imagine, perhaps the gentlelady ranking member might, imagine the federal government owns much of the land in your district. You can't develop it, you can't tax it, but your local county has to patrol it and keep it safe. So that is an enormous burden on our counties, not through any fault of their own, not through any fault of the residents, just through the history of who owns the land. And again, PILT doesn't address that issue. It doesn't solve that issue, but it gets us through. It gets us through. It allows us to get through and our counties to operate. And I appreciate both of your commitment to finding a real way to make it happen. And when we talk about paying for something in the Farm Bill, again, immediately our shackles go up. They can't pay for what they have to pay for in that bill. That's what the debate is about. How are they doing that? I don't know where this extra money will come from in the Farm Bill. I don't know where else it will come from, but I know that appreciate having advocates such as yourself to ensure that this does occur, because literally our counties rely on this to operate every day. And I'll go to the chairman. Yes.
Well, I sympathize with you. I'm with you in the issue altogether. I have several of my counties that are PILT counties, some of the poorest counties in the country. In fact, I'm thinking of McCreary County, next to my home county, which is 80+% owned by different agencies of the federal government. The PILT money that they get in lieu of taxes is in their everyday budget.
Right.
It's in garbage pickup. It's in county road crews and the like. And they simply can't survive without it. And it's one of the poorest counties in the country. So I'm with you on wanting to get this fixed. Mr. Chairman, could I clarify something?
Gentleman
we were talking.
I'd really like for you, and if all members will hear this, so please feel free to refer to whatever explanation.
Yeah. In the conversation with the Judge Hastings, we were talking about the COLAs for judges. There is language in the bill that allows judges to receive a COLA based on current law. And then current law, not in this bill, but current law, authorizes judges to receive a 1% COLA, and the money for the COLA is on the mandatory side. I hope that clarifies that somewhat.
The chairman could tell me what page that might be found in the bill at some point. I would appreciate some.
We'll find it out.
No, I know you would, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So to conclude, thank you both for your time and work in putting this bill together. It's a lot of work. There are other things we could have talked about here today, but I do appreciate your attention to finding a path forward for PILT and appreciating the incorporation of the floor amendment that I offered on the 287G cuts, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado yields back his time. The gentleman from Orlando, Florida, Mr. Webster's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank both of you for your great work. I think this is definitely a step towards regular order, and regular order is a friend, and I am excited about the fact we're moving in that direction. It's going to be something great to behold. And also, thank you. I had written your subcommittee on Homeland Security about making certain that there's enough Customs and Border Protection personnel at the ports of entry, especially the 23 largest international airports, and maybe more specifically, I didn't say it specifically, Orlando International Airport, which is one of the largest final destinations in the world. And you did that, and I appreciate that taking place. Also, though, I'm very appreciative that you did not charge a international passenger a fee for that service. In our own area, I'm told that for every dollar of fee there would be on international passengers, it would be a 2% reduction. For us, who have 59 million visitors every year to my little district, it would be huge. 2% is a lot, and if it had been higher, it would have been more. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. You did a great job, and that's some small parochial issue that I was interested in, but it also benefits the entire country. I think international travel and tourism is a very important part of our economic engine, and you did a great job in balancing that all out. I appreciate it. One last thing, Mr. Chairman, I know there's a lot of talk about the MRA. I can, if anybody would like, I have found places where you can save thousands and thousands of dollars without giving up any service. So if you need it for giving raises or whatever you need it for, I'd be glad to share that with you. It is phenomenal what can occur. I'll give one. This would save you $32,000 a year. I couldn't find anyone that did not sign up because there's no check that says none of the above. You check one of the 4 vendors for computer services to have your computers fixed for free. Only it's cost you, the lowest amount is $1,288 per month, $1,288 per month. I didn't check a box. You know, it's kind of interesting the response you get when you don't check a box in the federal government. People were shocked that I didn't check the box. But I didn't. They said, you don't want your computers fixed for free? I go, not at that price. So I didn't get it. Instead, I bought 2 laptop computers for $850 each. So now for the 15 employees I have 17 computers. If one breaks, I just hand them another one. And I ended up saving over $30,000. So there's one. You want to take that money, you can either turn it back or you can use it to give raise to your employees, whatever you want to do with it. But anyway, there's one. If you want some more, I can give you a way to save millions. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. I would now yield to the young chairwoman from Miami, Joan Wonsraki.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to these distinguished colleagues who are here before us. I want to say thank you to both of you and also to Subcommittee Chair Kay Granger for the excellent job that she did on the Foreign Ops section of your bill regarding an issue that I had problems with before. It was part of the bill and it was taken out, and that was we were going to fund UNESCO for their World Heritage sites, different sites in our congressional districts or states that were going to be designated as of importance. And the reason I was against that funding is because UNESCO decided as an agency in the United Nations to admit Palestine to its membership, even though 2 provisions of U.S. law are very clear in saying to any UN agency, if you accept Palestine into your membership without the Palestinians first having a peace accord with Israel, then we will not fund you. And since UNESCO admitted Palestine to its roles, the Obama administration has been trying to change U.S. law and to give not only the funding for this year, but also the late fees, because we have not pulled out of UNESCO as we should have, and so they keep charging us. And every year, the Obama administration comes forward with this subterfuge to try to do a run around the law. And now what they decided is they did this trick about the World Heritage Sites, saying that it's not really going to UNESCO, even though it's called the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It's really to help your district. And I'm sure I could have gotten a dumpster behind my favorite restaurant to be declared a historical site and gotten funding. But I thank Congresswoman Subcommittee Chair Kay Granger for eliminating that, and I will be very vigilant about that, because U.S. law is clear, and any agency of the UN is welcome to admit Palestine. We're not saying that they can't do so, but they're not going to get our U.S. money, and I think it's time to get tougher about what we do with our money in the UN. So I thank you for removing that provision that's of importance to me, and I know it's to other members as well. So thank you.
Let me just make 2 points. First of all, I appreciate your leadership on this issue, and I support your position. And it's unfortunate that UNESCO did accept Palestinian Authority. However, it is a real conundrum, because the World Heritage Sites are important. And I remember visiting several years ago, and I do think they need our support. I also think there should be some way to support the other important activities of UNESCO. However, they made their bed, and I'm not sure that they could reverse it. This is something that Kay Granger and I have been talking about, because I think, as I mentioned, a lot of the work they do is very important, and supporting the World Heritage Sites is very important. They recently, in fact, as we speak, I believe, are having a very important exhibit in Paris regarding Jewish tradition and Israel. Excuse me. And I know that there are going to be people visiting it throughout the world, but I certainly made it clear to them that I couldn't be part of it and I couldn't be a sponsor until they reverse their position. So I thank you for your leadership, but I do hope we can work together to see if there's some way to fund the World Heritage Sites separate from the money going through UNESCO. I'm not sure that is possible.
Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman Lloyd. UNESCO, like Iran, knows how to play us. And so they will do some showboat Jewish things while they slam Israel in the back. And they know how to play us, and we're suckers for it. And we reward them with our money because they know that we're going to come back and say, oh, UNESCO, you're such a wonderful organization. There is not one thing that UNESCO does, and I have been researching it, there's not one thing that UNESCO does that is not done, cannot be done by any other agency in the UN, and is presently being done by other agencies in the UN. And they should not be rewarded with U.S. funding, because we made it very clear before their vote in October of 2011, if you do this, X, then Y will happen. They knew it, and they wanted to rub our nose in it, and I think that we should pull out. We should not keep getting this dues and arrears, and whenever it comes up, whether they call it World Heritage Site or whatever, I'm going to oppose it, and I will work my hardest to make sure that UNESCO or any UN body that admits Palestine, a non-existent state, will not receive any U.S. funding, no matter what they call it. Thank you.
I think we're on the same page, and I think that you and Kay Granger and myself have sent a very clear message to UNESCO. They've come here, they've talked to us, and either they reverse their position or they'll have to endure the consequences.
Thank you. But the reality is that it was in the bill until just this weekend. So when the opposition was coalesced, and we were very clear in saying, I'm not voting for it. I don't care if it's this much of the budget. It sends a clear message to all the UN bodies that we really do mean it. Sometimes when we pass laws, we mean it, and we will not fund them. So with all due apologies, it was in the bill. We had every intention to fund UNESCO. And I want you to know that many of us strongly disagree with that, even if it's a penny, and even if it's to help undernourished children everywhere and, all of that good heartwarming stuff. There are many other agencies that can do it. So thank you.
Thank
It wasn't
you.
the budget. Please don't put it back in the budget. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlewoman from Miami yields back her time. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burgess, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, our colleagues, for the work that you've done. I guess the good news for you is as you close the chapter on 2013, the next chapter beckons in just really a few months' time. And some things that perhaps I would have liked to have seen you do differently in this product, perhaps we can talk about what is going to happen now in May, June, and July of 2014, because you all will be right back at your workplaces very soon and doing that work. And we've heard several members of this Rules Committee today talk about the importance and the significance of medical research and wish that we could provide more dollars for that. And I'm good with that. I wish we could too. But let me ask that at least we stop taking dollars inappropriately from those monies that you have appropriately appropriated to the National Institute of Health. And I'm referring specifically to the TAP put on NIH by the Department of Health and Human Services, specifically in Section 8, the Labor H Department, Title 2, Section 205, the HHS TAP of 2.5%. That's $700–800 million that is coming out of NIH funding right now to fund who knows what at the Secretary's discretion in the Department of Health and Human Services. I would just submit that she has enough various funds that she can go to for her good works, and she should not be taking money from the Department of the National Institute of Health. So as you construct this legislation going forward, I hope you will pay particular attention to that, because it is taking scarce research dollars away from NIH. Dr. Collins does the best he can with what we give him, but we shouldn't be making his job harder.
Will the gentleman yield on that?
Yes, I would be happy to yield, my
Let
Chairman.
me just add my response to it. The President's request wanted to increase the TAP to 3.2%. It's currently at 2.5. It's currently at 2.5. He wanted to increase it to 3.2. I tried to get it down to 1%, unsuccessfully. So what we did was just stay with the status quo, which is 2.5.
Well, if claiming my time, the President's request would take that to nearly $1 billion that would be taken directly out of research to fund some other activity in the Department of Health and Human Services. Mr. Chairman, I will work with you in every way I can to eliminate this TAP on NIH, because I think it's wholly inappropriate. If there needs to be additional money for the administrative activity to Health and Human Services, then find those from the appropriate source. Let's not give money to NIH and then on the QT take it back to fund some other activity. That's a shell game, and we should not be participants in that. I think the President is desperately mistaken by trying to increase that amount.
I'll be happy to work with you.
Thank you. Ms. Lowy, Ranking Member Lowy, on the, you may recall a year ago we had quite a vigorous debate on emergency funding after Hurricane Sandy, and I believe it affected your state significantly. So a lot of money, some $60 billion as I recall, was appropriated as in an emergency for repair of damage inflicted by the storm. Now, unfortunately, we're hearing some news reports about, was every dollar spent wisely? And I guess my question to you is it an oversight function of the Appropriations Committee that you do the oversight on these funds that were supposed to go and restore our friends and neighbors in the states that were affected?
Yes.
So it is your committee's responsibility to provide that oversight.
Well, I don't say we're the only ones.
I agree with that, because I believe our committee in Energy and Commerce, the Oversight Investigation Subcommittee, has some jurisdiction there as well. But I guess my frustration is that seems to be difficulty with getting that oversight function engaged. And I mean, this is a lot of money. And yes, it's going to do good things, but at the same time, a lot of money can sometimes attract the attention of people who are going to divert funds for less than responsible activities. So all I'm asking is that for both of us, the authorizing committee and the appropriations committee, that we keep our oversight glasses fixed on these problems as they could occur, because I got to believe that there is more of those stories that are out there, and we want to restore people's faith in the United States Congress. We don't want to exist with an 8% approval rating. But when we send $60 billion off some corner of the country and then we don't even look at how they're spending it, that's a problem.
We'll have probably 100 to 120 hearings in the committee this year. That's normal. And that's where we bring in the agency heads and the department heads and the secretaries and so on. When they make the request for a budget, we have them in and grill them. On Sandy, we included several oversight requirements in that bill, the Sandy bill, and we get frequent reports on the obligation and expenditure of those monies. And we follow up with hearings, staff studies, work closely with GAO and the inspectors general. The agencies that receive most of that money in Sandy, FEMA, HUD, Federal Transit Administration, Army Corps of Engineers, are especially receiving scrutiny. Some of the money flows out slowly, especially in HUD and Transit. So much of the useful data is still coming in. We've not found any cases of fraud or abuse of Sandy to date. The committee will continue to vigorously oversee the expenditure of those monies, and we welcome others to join us in the oversight.
Well, I appreciate your attention. Yes.
I just want to follow up with the chairman's comments, because I know this is a passion of mine and the chairman and most members of Congress. If we're going to work so hard to appropriate money, I want to know how every dollar is spent. There's currently an S&I study, and in particular, the bill increased oversight of CDBG grantees because of lessons learned from Hurricane Katrina assistance. The bill required that grantees publish details of all their contracts and procurement processes on their websites. The supplemental also required that grantees submit a spending plan for review, required that grantees have sufficient financial controls in place, and finally, the bill included $10 million for the Office of the Inspector General to ensure that the funds are spent properly. So I know that the chairman and I want to continue to work with you. I think this has to be built in every part of this bill. Taxpayers work too hard, and we have to ensure them and give them confidence that this money is spent appropriately. So I thank you, and we'll keep you posted on this issue.
I appreciate that. May I ask which agency that Inspector General represents?
I think it's ours, isn't it? It's HUD.
OIG, okay. Finally, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we have been concerned about in the Energy and Commerce Committee is the Environmental Protection Agency's use of Title 42 authority to establish higher pay grades for some of their employees. And my understanding is that this is set to expire in 2015. My hope is that it will be allowed to expire. There are certainly instances that have given us cause to question the additional expenditures within the Environmental Protection Agency. Of course, EPA was originally part of HHS, and that it is from that they derive, they maintain that they received that authority. It is set to expire in 2015. I hope we will let it die a natural death. So as you go through your next year's appropriations, please keep that in mind as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. I now would yield myself time that I did not use up front. And first of all, let me say this. I want to thank both of you for taking time to be here. I'm going to try and go through, Mr. Chairman, several questions that I have given the time to go through the bill. We should have provided your staff with several pages so that you can easily relate to it. And I do recognize you may or may not have answers to my questions. But the first would be on page 1127. 1127. I think your staff should have been provided these pages. And my question is, it refers to section 406. The question really is, the statement that says none of the funds made available in this act. Is the act the whole bill? Is it a section, a title, or is it the entire bill?
It's just that division.
Just that division. Thank you very much. I am very pleased to see that for this title, and I'll start reading it that way, that no funds may be available to be transferred to any department, agency, or instrumentally of the United States government except pursuant to this act. I think, to the extent that I have read the bill and looked at things, I like it where things are not transferable between agencies. I appreciate the words that you're giving me. Next, page 1007. 1007, the Secretaries of Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education shall each prepare and submit to the Committee on Appropriations of the House of Representatives and the Senate a report on the number and amount of contracts, grants, and cooperative agreements exceeding $500,000 in value awarded by the Department on a non-competitive basis. I could not state more strongly how pleased I am in the act and the things which you are doing pursuant to having instructions to this administration. Third, page 473. Which would be line 14, providing further that the Office of Management and Budget shall have not more than 60 days in which to perform budgetary policy reviews under water resource matters on which the Chief of Engineers has reported. Ladies and gentlemen, I deal with the Corps of Engineers on a regular basis, and they seem to be hamstrung by the Department of Office and Management Budget. I am delighted, Mr. Chairman and Mrs. Lowy, that you have taken time to give instructions as such. I'm sure I could go through the entire bill and see page after page, as I have, about really what I consider to be either A, the effective use of resources, where people do not, in my opinion, they delay responses, they delay projects, they delay things, enabling, for some reason or another, a political decision or other. And secondly, where you have engaged them on the proper use of knowledge by the United States House of Representatives and the Senate to be able to understand no bid contracts. No bid contracts that we later find out are issued, and of course you only went to $500,000. I don't know how many of these contracts, but I'm sure it represented a source of irritation to members of Congress, up to and including myself, and you responded in kind. I'd like to take, does gentleman or gentlewoman have any comments over what I've said?
No, thank you.
Did I read what I did wrong? Or you caught on what I said and I knew what you were trying to do?
Yeah, I'm with you.
I'd like to, just briefly, I know we're trying to hurry, I'd like to recover what I've heard today. $46 billion below the Senate FY14 budget. It's below 2009 enacted levels. It's adjusted for inflation, a 10% cut in spending from President Bush's last budget. $21 billion below last year's first time since Korean War that government spending has been cut 4 years in a row. No new funding for Obamacare, a $1 billion cut from Obamacare slush fund, $10 million IPAB, and CMS funding remains unchanged. Prevents transfer of Gitmo detainees to U.S. soil. prevents deep sequester cuts to DOD, 1% pay raise for the troops. It prohibits IRS targeting specifically of political groups and protects First Amendment rights. Mr. Chairman, you did hear us. The IRS was well out of bounds for us to have to specifically put that as embarrassing, and I'm glad you did it. It reduces funding for EPA by $143 million, increases NIH funding by $1 billion, provides $90 million in grants for school safety, increases funding for the VA by $2.3 billion, takes steps to ensure a timely and efficient exchange of electronic health records between DOD and VA, which is, as you may know, I know we at least had Mr. Culverson and others that were up here where we extensively discussed that. Thank you for getting it done. Fully funds, as has been noted, fully funds embassy security around the world, prevents aid to Libya until they completely assist in the Benghazi investigations. I'm sure the gentlewoman Kay Granger from Fort Worth, Texas had a lot to do with that. Prohibits subsidies for Amtrak if they have rates that are more than 50% off peak fare. You can't give this stuff away and expect us to fund you to the tune of $1 billion a year. I could probably go on and on. I intend to tell you both that I'm proud of the work that you've done. Thank you for page after page of making sure that we are getting this administration, notwithstanding it's good for any organization, they occasionally need a kick right in the pants. Do your job, get it done, let's work together.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I want you to add to that list the fact that this bill also restores funding for disabled veterans and their cause.
And I could have done that and should have.
As President Lincoln
Yes,
said, we have to bind up the nation's wounds and care for the widow and orphan. And
it just could not have been said better than both of you did it today. I want to thank both of you for being here today. I see no further questions from the Rules Committee for our very special guest today. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You are both excused, and thank you very much. The next panel will now be called up before the Rules Committee this afternoon, and I see and I know that there have been others who have been sitting around and who came up to see this great work that's being done today, but in particular, we're honored to have the distinguished gentleman from Tyler, Texas, the gentleman, Mr. Gomer. Mr. Gomer, without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered to the record, and the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can be pretty brief, believe it or not. Obviously, there's so much that could be discussed, and politics does make strange partners, because I agree with Mr. Polis. We got to take care of that filth situation. One easy one, it would seem, and I know this anticipated may be a closed rule, but this ought to be an easy one. The Voting Rights Act has done a lot of good, and thank goodness that it got passed. But things have changed over the last 50 years. I tried to encourage my dear friend John Conyers and Jen Sensenbrenner to accept the Gohmert Amendment that would have allowed the Voting Rights Act punitive provision to apply anywhere where there was improper racial disparity. They chose not to, or to fight it, and therefore, as I explained to my friends, it's going to be struck down because of unequal protection. When the handful of states that were originally punitively handled and appropriately under the VRA ended up, most of them, with better racial situations than many other places in the country, then it violates the Constitution's requirement of equal protection to continue to punish states that are better than the states doing the punishing. So the Supreme Court struck down Section 4 and said it's unconstitutional. You can't keep being punitive to areas that have done a better job than the ones doing the punishing, and so it's been struck down. In the meantime, within the section of the Department of Justice General Administration salaries and expenses is $2,746. $2,746 or $6,618. That could be easily struck because that pertains to the Department of Justice that handles the Voting Rights Act, the part that's now been ruled unconstitutional. And so as Christian Adams, who used to be with the Civil Rights section of the Justice Department, points out in his article January 14th, basically that $2 million plus is paying for an extended coffee break. And most of us have heard the expression, idle hands or minds can be the devil's workshop. And those of us who went to law school, if you're being paid to do a job that you can't do anymore, it's not a good thing. So it would be an easy one that $2 million, $2.7 million could be used. I know it's a rounding area to some people, and it's also worth noting in the article the 30 individuals that are employed to do this work that was now called unconstitutional is one Stephanie Giamfi, who in 2011 was pointed out by Matthew Boyle that she is admitted, according to Hans von Spakovsky, she admitted to leaking information, lying 3 times about it to the Inspector General, and it was privileged documents, sensitive legal materials that she leaked to the Washington Post and others, lied about it 3 times. She's still getting paid 3 years later. That's $2.7 million we don't have to spend. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Gomer, thank you very much. Judge Gomer, thank you very much for being here today. Does anyone on the minority side have a question for Judge Gomer? Seeing no questions, does anyone on the Republican side? The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I appreciate the gentleman from Texas bringing up the Voting Rights Act. It's very difficult to talk about because if you talk about changing anything about the Voting Rights Act, folks think you're against voting rights. We're talking about Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act that does not apply to all the country, just applies to parts of the country. And I would say to my friends, this ought to be one of those things we could get together on in a bipartisan way. If this is a good law, let's apply it to the entire country and give everybody those protections.
Exactly.
Or if it's a bad law, let's repeal it and take everybody out from under those burdens. But it is outrageous in America in 2014 that some states get treated as bad actors and presumed bad actors, and other states get treated as presumed good actors. That does nothing to protect the voting rights of folks across this country, and I appreciate the gentleman's courage in bringing that up today.
Well, and if we fix it, it's probably not going to be in this year's budget. Well, if they want to hire people back, fine, put it in there, but we shouldn't be paying for a section to do work that's been considered unconstitutional. That's my only point. Sure, if it becomes constitutional in the future, then put it back in, but not now, not with all the money needed elsewhere.
I thank the gentleman.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Further questions for Judge Gomer? Judge Gomer, I want to thank you very much. I hope that you will leave what you brought so that it's available in the transcript, and I want to thank you for your time.
Well,
and
humbly submit it for the record.
Without objection, that will be done. And thank you very much. Gentleman is now excused. Thank you very much. Just now close the hearing on the Senate Amendment to H.R. 3547, and the chairman will be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman, Vice Chairman of the committee, Mrs. Fox.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for the consideration of the Senate amendments to H.R. 3547. The rule makes an order a single motion offered by the chairman of the Committee on Appropriations or his designee that the House concur in the Senate amendment to the title and concur in the Senate amendment to the text with an amendment inserting the text of Rules Committee Print 113-32 in lieu of the matter proposed to be inserted by the Senate. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion and provides that it shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule provides that the Senate amendments and the motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour debate on the motion, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. Section 2 of the rule provides that upon adoption of the motion specified in Section 1 of the rule, House Concurrent Resolution 74 shall be considered as adopted. Section 3 of the rule provides that the chair of the Committee on Appropriations may insert in the congressional record not later than January 16, 2014, such material as he may deem explanatory of the Senate amendments in the motion specified in Section 1 of the rule. Section 4 of the rule provides that on any legislative day during the period from January 17, 2014 through January 24, 2014, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved, and the chair may at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time to be announced by the chair in declaring the adjournment. Finally, Section 5 of the rule provides that the Speaker may appoint members to perform the duties of the chair for the duration of the period and addressed by Section 4 of the rule.
You now heard the motion by the gentlewoman from North Carolina. I defer at this time to the gentleman, the chairman from Oklahoma, for an explanation of the rule. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The rule provides for a motion by the chairman of the Appropriations Committee to concur with the Senate amendment to the text of the bill with a further amendment consisting of the text of the consolidated appropriations measure. It provides 1 hour of debate, evenly divided. It also confirms the title to the content of the bill by providing for passage of an enrollment correction after adoption of Chairman Rogers' motion. Lastly, the rule contains our normal authority to allow the Speaker to manage next week's district work period. This is a straightforward rule for consideration of a very important bill. I urge its support.
You've now heard a motion and explanation. Is there discussion or amendment to that?
Yes.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the House proposal be subject to further amendment under an open process under the 5-minute rule. And I give this amendment because I recall quite clearly that appropriations bills used to be done under the 5-minute rule. And since ours is the only committee that has had the benefit of hearing from the authors of the bill, and none of our fellow members have, and probably since it was filed last night, you have any idea what's in here, it seems to be incumbent upon those of us in the Rules Committee to let them have an opportunity when this bill is debated on the floor under the 5-minute rule to make amendments if they so choose. I think it's a terribly important step that we could take to include all the rest of the members other than those just on the Rules Committee and the authors of the bill. And I ask for a yes vote.
Gentlewoman has now discussed her amendment. Is there further discussion? I would simply offer, without disagreeing with the gentlewoman, because both she and I both are aware of what is contained here, but I would offer a no vote in support of what I hope was a well-balanced, well-thought-through opportunity for not just the House and Senate to work a package with each other, but really the taxpayers of the country to receive the benefit of us getting this done effectively so we can get on with the rest of our work.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm perfectly cognizant of the fact that we want to move this quickly, but just to give other members of the House who may not know what's in here, and as I said, this is the only committee that's had any hearing on it at all.
Yes, ma'am.
And it would be really nice if this committee, which has the ability to do it, would allow under the 5-minute rule other members to have some say about what they want to see in here and what they do not want to see in here.
Yes, ma'am. Well, the discussion's taking place now, and I am well aware that there are valid points that are being made, so let's just put that to a vote. How about that?
All right, let's do that.
We'll now vote on the gentlewoman's amendment from New York. Those in favor of the SALT amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. The noes have it.
May I have a roll call?
Roll call request.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? No. Ms. Ross-Lehtinen? No. Ms. Ross-Lehtinen? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor of the Fox amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Roll call.
Roll call is requested.
Ms. Fox? Aye. Ms. Fox? Aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Ross-Leitonen.
Aye.
Ms. Ross-Leitonen, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Slaughter.
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern. No. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Motion is agreed to. I want to thank all members of the committee for their attendance today. The gentleman, Mr. Cole, will be handling this on the floor for Republicans.
And Mr. McGovern for the...
And I do not anticipate where we have anything scheduled for the rest of the week, but as always, would be in contact immediately with the gentlewoman as I learn the status of other things.
Thank you.
The hearing is now completed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.